Thank you everyone for taking our time to be here. We're so excited to see a full house. And it's really a special moment, I think, for anyone to have their first novel come out. So I'd love for all of you to join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers. Congratulations again. Okay, Rupleena and Atharva, I'm missing the moment because of the mics, but we're just giving you a round of applause for your first books.
Thank you.
So, it's a lot to pack into a short amount of time, and I definitely want to leave time for audience questions. So we're going to do this in a format whereby each speaker is going to do a short reading, and I'll have to be the annoying person who keeps a track of time. We'll do a reading, a little bit of a Q&A on the stage, and then open up for questions. So please be sure to think through any of your comments or questions, ideally questions. We'll start with Anisha Lalvani, who anyone who's been to Jaipur Lit Fest in the past would know. She's here in a very different avatar and with a very interesting book called Girls Who Stray, which might surprise some of us who've known you over the past few years in a very good way. Anisha, will you start by giving us a little bit of context for this book and a short reading?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here. I've been at JLF, associated with JLF for many years. I've been here as a volunteer, publisher, etc. It's my first year here as an author, so it's extra special. So my book, like she said, it's called Girls Who Stray. It's about a young woman who inadvertently gets involved in a double murder. And the crime is based on a real-life case, the Nidhari Noida serial murders. So, yeah, I'll do a bit of a reading. I thought I'd read basically from the point in my book where the girl has gone through a heartbreak. She's broken up with a property developer, a man who's much older than her. And she's living in Delhi and she's kind of feeling various things. And so I thought I'll start my reading, yeah. A boy puckers his mouth at me, or croons an item song, or tells me I am his baby doll. I stop cowing down. I look at him, and him, too. These kids, 14, 15, with spiked gelled hair, smoking lazily in the noonday sun. These layabouts lolling about eternally in the parks, on the parapets, listening to Punjabi rap and hip-hop about Rokra and Kudis and Lamborghinis on full volume on their smartphones. Loping in the streets, loitering like all of the city is made for them to loiter in. I say to them, shut up. This is why Delhi is the rape capital of the universe. I know I'm screeching, that my voice is grating, and so I stop mid-sentence, turn abruptly, walk away as fast as I can as I hear the kids roar and give each other high-fives, imitating my shrill chiding. How to drive the fear of life into them. And after dinner one day, my father taps my shoulder, and when I turn, he gives me a Kinder Joy chocolate egg. For girls, it says on top in bright pink. When I open the egg to see inside, a handwritten note in his broken writing. Daughter equals 10 sons. Happy Daughter's Day, he says. Actually, I think it was yesterday, but anyway. I look up at him, my eyes well, I look down quickly, blink fast, open this side, he says. I open the second layer inside the egg, peel it off. It's a ladybug, I think, he says. I look up at my father again. Would you like to assemble it? My father, the eternal assembler of small things. He smiles, takes it from me, assembles it skillfully in a minute. Here, he says, for you. I walk the streets of the city, one hand in my pocket, the other slid into the pouch of my handbag, feeling the rounded cap of the pepper spray, gripping the wooden hilt, slipping with sweat, gripping again as I stare back at every man, woman, child that looks at me, at every wounded, rabid dog, at the monkeys shrieking overhead, the parakeets and barbets screeching as though the world is about to end, at every car that whizzes past, all the city's citizens packed tight in the metro. Walking again, a few days after the man-grabbing incident. The same street, opposite Lodi Gardens, because I must. Because it is mine too to walk on. Dark, cold, hazy yellow light in patches through leaves. I hear him behind me, footsteps making time with my own, his shadow dipping in and out of mine, longer, heftier. Walking faster, faster, skipping now, obvious that I'm trying to escape, and suddenly, I turn around and point a knife to slice his pupil. Frozen like this, he and I, with the tip of the knife pointing straight into his eye, ready to slice through his retina, his hands midair holding a paper. Frozen like this, he and I, and I see the reflection of my own impassive face in his enlarged pupil. His eyelashes flicker on the pointed edge of the knife. He swallows as the dry, broken branches scratch at my throat. Sister, he screams suddenly and drops at my feet, shaking violently, his head on my shoes, both his hands on my shoes, simpering, sobbing, sniveling on my shoe, leaving a trail of spit, saying, sister, sorry, sorry, sorry. And then I read the bold black letters from the papers he is holding, a pamphlet announcing a seminar on women empowerment in the Delhi University Hall next Thursday evening. Everywhere, every corner, by the turn of every road, behind every building, from all five streets that lead out from every junction, at every roundabout, I seek hostility in the city. Search for it everywhere I look. I seek it, and when I find it at every turn, on every street, at every junction, in the passing looks of every stranger, every beggar, every man or woman, wealthy, poor, every child, I become further hostile. Hate the city further with every bone in my body. Yeah, thank you.
So firstly, a prolonged sigh from anyone who's from Delhi, because we can recognize so many things from there. We love it, we hate it, it is a hostile city. But also, as you can see, Anisha's writing, it sort of escalates, right? There's a little kinder egg, that very tender moment with the father, the eternal assembler of things, beautiful, descriptions, and then you're plunged straight into this heart of how violent the city can feel, especially to young women. I promised the writers that I would ask them the most annoying question, so here it is. How autobiographical is this book, Anisha? What would you like to tell us?
Yeah, thanks, Amrita. So I think for me, I lived through Delhi as well. I'm from Bombay, but then I moved to Delhi to work in publishing, and I worked in a bookstore. And for me, more than the actual situations or incidents, which is not based on my life. It's about this girl who gets involved in a murder, and I promise you, I'm not a murderer. I was not involved.
So she says.
Yeah.
So she says.
But for me, more than the actual incidents, it's really about feelings, and it's about things that I was sensing in myself as well as what I sensed in other people. So I really started writing this book not knowing that it would be a novel or not wanting to write even fiction. I was just really compelled and driven to write about what I think of now as two kind of big themes. So one is like on modernity, in the sense like how does social media affecting us, and what it's like to live in this very fast-paced world that we live in and feeling kind of out of pace with things, with the economy moving so fast. So that was like one theme, and then the other thing was on women and misogyny and violence and all of that. But I wanted to approach it from a nuanced perspective. So I wrote long scenes about the same girl who's the protagonist of my book. In one scene, she's sitting in a mall, and like I said, she's feeling out of it. Her friends are all posting on LinkedIn, but she doesn't have a cool job, so she has nothing to say. She's envious of her friends. So that was one scene. And this other scene from which I just read out was about this girl walking through Delhi, and she faces heartbreak herself. And I wanted to juxtapose her own heartbreak and the misogyny that she faces against this much broader moment of the questioning of misogyny, which was during the Nirbhaya protests. So I was there at that time in Delhi, and I went to those protests. And to me, it was this really big political moment that I was kind of witnessing for the first and last time. And so this novel started in the form of these personal essays. And much later, I realized that I could weave it together through a narrative of a thriller. And that's when I brought in the whole crime aspects of it.
Yes, and it's very, very, very much a page turner. So thank you for sharing that. I think fiction does enable us to show aspects of life without actually writing a social commentary. It allows us and enables us. And Atharva will come to you next. Firstly, a round of applause for this incredible debut novel, and being the only man on this panel, he's a brave one. Atharva's book, Huda, starts with actually the story of three sisters, including an Anisha, which is why I was like very cheesily putting him after Anisha, but also you were also inspired by a true crime. You write very sensitively. Like one of the first things you see is how the story of these three sisters, and not a spoiler, but they go missing, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. But everybody's fixated on what Anisha is wearing in that village. So it's told from different characters' point of view, and they all mention, she's a student, by the way. Oh, she wasn't in a school uniform. She was wearing this green top. Can you tell us a little bit and then do a reading for us?
Yeah.
Is it not on?
It's on? Can everybody hear me? Oh, great. Sorry, this is my first time at Jaipur Literature Festival, but also my first time at any literature festival. So very exciting, and thank you. So very exciting, but also kind of intimidating because so many people. Whoa. But yeah, I mean, so it's the book is based on a real life incident, a true crime, but it's a true crime novel, not non-fiction. And Anisha spoke about Nirbhaya. This incident basically happened a couple of months after Nirbhaya, and there's a paragraph in the book which mentions a policeman mentions that this incident. So it's the incident itself, the crime itself, is about three sisters who were raped and killed in a very small village in Maharashtra, Bhandara district of Maharashtra. And so one of the characters in the book mentions that this has happened in Murmari, which is just a small village, just an hamlet. So I mean, Nirbhaya is the bigger deal. Nirbhaya is the bigger case, and Nirbhaya is the case that will matter when the elections come. So this is just going to pass over, which is what happened with the real incident as well, and it remains unsolved 10 12 years down the line. So the novel is told from various perspectives, but in a sense, you can say that there's a journalist, a reporter, a crime reporter, who's the protagonist, and he had, sorry, yeah, he had covered the case, and he had covered the case for a newspaper, and 6 years later he revisits, he comes back to the case in order to write a book about it. So I'm going to read from from a passage where he has decided basically to quit his job and pursue the case because he wants to write a book about it. At that time, I was a 25-year-old rookie reporter from Mumbai on his first assignment outside the city. I wasn't very young, but I was young enough to think of it as a thrilling assignment. The story was my first front page, and I was proud of it. And so, I remember, was my editor. Overall, the story itself was a success, but it was just an editorial success. I wrote it, I filed it, and then I moved on to other things. Life went on, and I must admit that for a couple of years, I wasn't really following up on the story of the three sisters until one day I came across my notebook from that day, filled up with details and observations, which I would eventually cut out of the printed story. But when I read those notes, I asked myself two questions. What happened to those three sisters and their case? And can this be turned into a book, one that would try to understand the story of the village and its people, and then juxtapose it with the story of the crime? By the time I found my notebook, my career as a journalist was stuck, or at least that's how I had begun to feel, as if I was doing nothing worthwhile, as good journalists should. And when I found out that the case had languished all these years without any solution, it deepened my career crisis, plunging me into a vortex of questions. Why is journalism vital if all we do is to write a mood piece and a spot copy about a heinous crime that ought to make us question our very existence? What use is journalism if it's a pillar that doesn't shake and doesn't challenge the democracy that it claims to support? If journalism is merely running after the latest story and the latest trend, as it is today, while falling at the feet of power, because power controls your salaries, I decided that I didn't want to be a part of this rut. So I quit my job and left for Murwani. As one could imagine, it wasn't an easy decision, but I felt that it was a decision I had to make, to save myself, but also to pay attention to the obsession that had been gnawing at me for years, perhaps ever since I left Murwani that night in the February of 2013. Thank you.
You know, Atharva, in a way, this is a story that also stayed with you for so many years. You said,
Yeah.
you know, it was it's a book that's about a decade in the making. You
Yeah,
first
yeah.
read the reportage in Indian Express. Shout out to journalists who still try to fight the good fight. I wanted to talk a little bit about that and, you know, what you say about how we all just move to the next big thing. And it really comes across in your book where, you know, everybody's perspective is seen through that agenda, except the family who's, you know, devastated and lost everything. And if you would, you know, the language is so beautiful in your book, but you were also telling me a little bit about, you know, how you'd like to write in Marathi, which is your mother tongue. If
Yeah.
you want to talk a little bit about language and how it shapes our
Yeah, I
stories.
mean, this was an insight that, or an observation that, you know, I thought of after, you know, writing the book, which is that, I mean, the language that is used in Hurda is a mix of English and Marathi. And I decided to do that because I mean, for starters, the book is based in a village and the characters are all people who don't speak English, right? I mean, the question was how to get that right. And how to get their language and their, the way they speak, how do I get that right? I wrote a number of drafts, and but they were not working because that all of those drafts were, in proper English, the way we have read English in books, in Indian English literature. So they were not working for me, and they did not seem. I mean, the dialogues did not seem as if they would come from the characters that I'm trying to describe and write about. So then I decided that, I mean, it doesn't matter what people think about the language, but I would have to, infuse the book with Marathi and Marathi words and Marathi sentences. So which is what I did, and I mean, we are in India. We basically have these English mediums in cities, and I mean, in my experience, you have. I went to an English medium school, but that was English medium school where, I mean, the textbooks were all in English, but the conversations were all in Marathi. Even the teachers spoke in Marathi. So while growing up, we could read English, we could write in English, but the conversational aspect of English, that wasn't there. We did not converse in English. So it's a bit of an interesting cultural thing where I'm not very fluent in writing Marathi, but I mean I can write in English, but my conversational skills, I think, in Marathi. My conversational skills in English are not as good as they are in Marathi. So yeah, I think that language aspect of it, I found that very interesting, and I decided that, I need to highlight that in the book.
And it comes across very authentically because each of them is
Thank you.
speaking in their own way. Of, do you want to tell us about how this story stayed with you? And it's been 10 years that you've
It's been
working
10
on this
years,
book.
yeah, yeah.
Just
So
incredible.
I read about the story in Indian Express. Smita Nair did that report, and I have spoken about this elsewhere, but I was a teenager back then. I was 16 at that point of time, and I think there's a line in in the making of Gangs of Wasipur where Nawazuddin Siddiqui says that, when when you encounter something as brutal and as disgusting as a murder when you are a teenager, that sort of remains with you, and you sort of become, I won't say obsessed, but it sort of marks you, right? And I think that's what happened with me, because I was very disgusted, I was very disturbed after reading that reportage. And I much like Chitranshu, who's the journalist, not the protagonist, but the journalist in the story. Much like him, I kept track of the story, and the story basically went out of the newspapers and the national media after a couple of days. But the local media, the Marathi media, continued to cover it, and I kept track of it for a little while. And I used to come back to the story. I used to, call people who were involved with the story, and I used to ask them what's the progress like. And at one point it struck me, I mean, it's been 6 years, 7 years, the village itself was geographically so small, and the case still remains unsolved. How is that possible? And I mean, all the facts are there, all the, not the evidence, but I mean, the police have investigated, it's all there, but it remains unsolved. There's no solution to that case. How can that happen? So that was the question that sort of prompted me to, go deeper into the story and perhaps write about it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, Rupleena, you're up. So Rupleena's debut book is called Summer of Then. It's a fascinating novel, and I'm coming back to that annoying question I promised them all. We're going to ask her how autobiographical it is, because her protagonist is this very strong character. In a way, she's also coming of age. She's also figuring out who she is in opposition to some other central characters in her life. She's unnamed, but she's also from Bengal, and she's a professor, an ad hoc professor. Rupleena, for those of you who don't know her, is a professor of literature at a university in Delhi. Can you take us through a little bit of the context setting, how autobiographical it is? Because I think we know novelists hate answering this question, but we also know we do end up sharing of ourselves in our fiction, maybe not point to point, and then of course a reading.
So, Summer of Then actually is the story of one decade, which is 2010 to 20. And it's told from the perspective of this young ad hoc temporary literature teacher who is in a way also looking at the world around her, and she's also sort of caught between these two men. So there's a question of love and betrayal, but there's also tremendously a question of class. She is middle class, and she is looking at the world around her, which is a fairly elite world. And through that, she's sort of observing the world, and she's also has this vantage point of being a literature teacher. And this is the point I think I would put the autobiography element, that I teach literature in a Delhi University college. And, one interesting thing about teaching literature in sometimes a dilapidated classroom is that, you're talking about things which are modern, which are contemporary. You're talking about the First World War, you're talking about the Second World War, you're talking about aspects of modernity while actually, within a classroom which has no fan. So you're talking about modernity in a place, in a city, which is also deeply feudal, where there is this constant tussle between modernity and feudalism. And in a way, I think that is the perspective of autobiography which I look at, particularly through the protagonist's sort of journey. And the other thing, of course, like, the other novel which I used to teach, and which is called Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, James Joyce. So I remember reading Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man and thinking that, where is the young, modern, contemporary Indian woman? Because unfortunately, we do not have, I think, now we do, of course, but at the time when you were teaching literature, we are looking at modernism, we are looking at Elena Ferrante, we were looking at so many things like Rachel Cusk, and, a professor who's going to Greece and has a perspective about life and, like love and desire. But I felt that somewhere it is underrepresented in India, and that is one of the things why I started with this perspective of the teacher. And then, of course, various things happen, and there's also cities and seasons. But to me, that's the semi-autobiographical element, the eye of a professor in India, in a big city college, where you have a very interesting demographic. The demographic of somebody who's like from a very elite school, and also who's a first-generation reader. So, so that dichotomy in a classroom was something that I wanted to capture. And I tried to do that with the observations of the protagonist. My novel, of course, is many more things. It's looking at one decade in the life of India as well. So it's basically divided through seasons and cities. So it starts with spring in Calcutta, which I'm going to read. And then it moves into Delhi, Calcutta, Bombay, and Edinburgh. And it is a coming of age because it's also a realization of everything that you cannot get, and the whole story of desire, guilt, and betrayal. There's also, it's also about love and marriage and about everything in the country, in a way. So, yeah, I'll just read a segment. Spring 2010, Calcutta. I first met Zap at the steps of his childhood home, breathing the cleanest air of the decade. After months of polluted air clogging our breath, the stars were visible and the sky resembled the ceiling of a planetarium I had visited one summer when I was 10. The guide at the planetarium had told us if we were to squint our eyes well enough, we would see Venus on a clear day. The sky had wrinkled with age and decay since that visit to the planetarium. Chemicals from factories promising progress had smoked haze into the city, but that night was different. Nikhil and Zap were film directors. Zap directed stage plays and films. Nikhil was trained as a cinematographer and directed films. That spring, Zap had just moved back to Calcutta after a few years of trying to permanently live in Germany. Calcutta was also Nikhil's hometown. Zap did not speak about his reason of moving back, but I remember Nikhil telling me that the Art Council, which had promised funding for Zap's long-term stay, had backed off. I heard them speak of everything except Germany and understood that both of them did not like to speak about their disappointments or betrayals. Nikhil told me about Zap's work when we were in a taxi on our way to Zap's house. I was looking at the rearview mirror and wearing my 307 orange organza lipstick. The orange was like the flame of the winter fire made by security guards huddled during Delhi winters. I rolled it twice on my lips. The taxi driver looked underage to drive. He was so thin, he could barely fill the large bucket seat. He tried to get a conversation out of Nikhil, the kind of conversation that gave a semblance of class equality. But Nikhil did not relent in these situations. I tried to make up for Nikhil's abruptness, like I usually did. The driver had to drop us at the entrance of the lane where Zap lived, where a crowd of people stood waiting. He told us helpfully that it was for a temple that had a good rumor network of wish fulfillment. He said he knew of someone who got a job after years of unemployment, only when he had tied a thread at the temple. I had read in the papers that for one peon's post at a government office, 8,000 postgraduate candidates had applied. Merit seemed like an illusion that only belonged to the privileged. I remember reading somewhere that students had stood in the sun for 8 hours to collect a form for a coaching center. One of them died of a heat stroke. 2 fell very ill. Did the rest of them get through to the college? They must have all prayed. So I was telling you about Zap. Nikhil cleared his throat like he did when he said something that he did not intend to actually say. Zap started directing stage plays only when he was in college. He was invited to take over a big musical production of Alice in Wonderland by the British theatre company that wanted to bring the expensive theatre experience to India. Zap hated the idea, but he wanted to move out of Calcutta. Nikhil added. Anyway, that was a decade back. Zap moved from theatre into films and is now back to Calcutta. He will probably work through both art forms. Can you believe he barely visited Calcutta the decade he was abroad? Nikhil continued the conversation while we passed the queue of people waiting to make their wish. I had not seen any play or film made by Zap, but I had been told that they had been making films since he was 15. They had shown at all the big film festivals in Berlin, New York, and Sydney. You should know that Zap is very good at making people do exactly what he wants them to do. He is known to be a very manipulative human being. An hour later, sitting in Zap's house, I understood why Nikhil wanted me to hear those words. It was like the warning sent out by weather departments to fishermen after the cyclone had descended over the ocean. And sorry, I'll just add one thing which I forgot to mention, which is that one of the things about this story is also a subplot, which is a partition sort of subplot, which essentially talks about generational trauma, family secrets. And that is something about this small village, small partition, failed establishment called Nilokeri. And the story sort of comes together about generations of women, the grandmother and the protagonist. And somewhere they come together with the past of sort of discovery, which she discovers about this little place, which was an establishment made during Nehruvian India, and something which sort of failed. So that failure and betrayal is something which sort of is the subtext of the novel, I think.
Okay, perfect. As you can see, Rupleena doesn't need a moderator prompt. So thank you so much for that. We're going to definitely keep time for questions, but Nayantara has been the most patient, possibly the youngest of our debut authors, right? So round of applause for Nayantara, please. And thank you to the students who are here very patiently. Bye. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Nayantara, I wanted to ask you about Liberal Hearts, which you brought the book, so you can show it. It's set in a university, a liberal arts university in Haryana. It's not the one that we're thinking of. It's called something else. You have
fictional college.
Fictional college. You also have this elements of, Rupeena's talking about sort of the class dimension. You also have a love story.
Yeah.
It's literally a coming of age story. You have these students discovering who they are. And again, they're in this environment which you point out is alien to everything they've known. Can you share a little bit about that and give us a reading?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll just start with the reading and then give context. So this is a scene somewhere halfway through the book between Veer and Namya, my two protagonists. And I think it sums up the main conflict of the book well. So I thought they're mid-argument here. So I'll just take it from there. If you want, I can help you get some quotes. In fact, I can give you a quote myself because Ganu is one of my closest friends. Don't worry, it'll have great traction. It'll be solid clickbait. You can include how it's the reason why I'm desperate to get out of here, so that I don't have to greet the man who murdered my friend with a ram ram every evening on the way back to a home that never stopped grieving the loss of my father. But of course, leaving will never be an option for me. Who knows what will happen to my family? What will become of Shyam? What he's saying makes me want to scream and ask a million questions, but I refrain as tears he seems unaware of pour down his cheeks. His voice breaks. I mean, really, Namya, you Mauryans are amazing. You yourself wrote long notes about the annihilation of caste, papers that are pro-reservation, and now you are so shocked to discover that caste in India is actually a reality. Where do you live? In some magical bubble? I mean, really, it's like some sort of dream world. Sometimes I wish there were free tickets to this utopia, but then I recall that I hate Maurya. Maurya took everything from us. I hate Maurya and all of you in it. His eyes are bloodshot and voice harsher and faster as he continues. It's agonizing being stomped all over by you, day in, day out. And instead of standing united as we take the heat, we either worship or resent you from afar and stomp all over each other instead. Here at home, we are taught to attack the most vulnerable to feel superior. The ones who live on the fringes of the village are considered the mud beneath our feet, just like we are considered the mud beneath yours. That's what Samir Tiwari did with Shyam today, stomped all over him. He's done it many times before, and he will do it again. I want to offer comfort, but have no idea how. Don't get me wrong, Namya. At no point do I want to be like you guys. In fact, I made a promise to my Bapi that I will never ever set foot in that place. But you're all bitter reminders of how differently I would have lived every single day of my life. How differently my fool and my Shyam would have done every single day of their lives had we been in our shoes. In your shoes. His dark brown skin glistens under his tears, making him shine like a saint. For the first time ever, the unguided inner child in him speaks to me. I move closer to put a hand in his hair, pat the top of his head slowly, indicating that I want him to carry on. His voice softens as he melts into me. You know why? Because we'd have known the value of what we have. We wouldn't have wasted it drinking, smoking, ODing, having sex with people we don't care about, and cheating in exams because we can. Now the side of his head is pressed against my chest, and my arms are wrapped tightly around him while he weeps. I let the tears seep into my kurta because even though he was the one who came back to comfort me, he hadn't a clue that it was he who needed comforting.
There are so many elements in this book. There's actually one section called "Poor Little Rich Girl." So
First chapter.
tongue in cheek for your protagonist. They talk about the bubble. There's also a mental health aspect. This anxiety.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit of that context, and then we'll open up for questions.
Yeah, so I think what I was trying to achieve with the way I placed my two protagonists, one in the village, one in this elite college of Maurya, was because I wanted to provide a contrast, right? That people experience the exact same place so differently. Like you have the same pin code, you literally have a wall in the middle of the university and the village, but Veer sees Maurya so differently from the way Namya sees it. And I think that context, when you look at it through that context of the haves and the have-nots, then suddenly, she seems like a poor little rich girl because, at least to him, because it's kind of like, you have all this and you're not even aware of your privilege. And to an outsider, you are just a poor little rich girl because the scale of your problems are so minimal in comparison to the scale of his. So that's what I was trying to achieve.
But in the micro, we see that, she's dealing with so much. She's a child of
Yeah,
divorce.
yeah,
She's trying to figure
absolutely.
out.
Exactly, and I think that mental health as well, because Veer's mom also is suffering from depression, and you know how it's experienced so differently in different spaces. Like for example, Namya has horrible anxiety, and she's really struggling. I think a lot of her issues, like what I was trying to achieve with that character was talk about stuff that everybody goes through, and everybody goes through very casually behind closed doors. And you know how crazy it drives her, and how she's constantly trying to tame this tsunami of anxiety and trying to figure out her self-worth and trying to come of age of sorts eventually over the course of the book. And I think that anxiety is something that I feel all first years end up having, especially, in a college like Moria, where you're so intimidated by everybody around you. Everyone seems so intelligent. Everybody knows what the right thing to say is. But actually, most people are just putting on a strong face and everybody's equally anxious and trying to make a good impression. So I wanted to write a protagonist that everybody has been at some stage of their life.
Yeah, and that pressure
Yeah.
of fitting in, it really comes across. You know how
Yeah.
she's sort of doing these, cartwheels internally, trying to make sure, and then she's confronted with an ex. Thank you so much. A round of applause for you as well. We do have time for a few questions. Can you raise your hand so the volunteers can see? Okay, that was the first one to go up. Here we go. Let me get a mic to you. I feel like everyone's been waiting for this.
Good afternoon to everyone.
afternoon.
And this question is for anyone who would like to answer, actually. And I'm a beginner who loves composing poetries and writing short stories. But I often find myself being lost in too many thoughts that I cannot structure them. And then I often find myself at a dead end that, oh God, what should I do now? How should I continue this story? So have any of you ever been in this situation? And if yes, how do you cope up with it?
Thank you. Anyone want to take that? What?
I can take it.
No, but I completely relate to that, but I mean, the way to go about it is basically the way I did it, because I felt the same for 10 years. For 10 years, I was just writing draft after draft after draft, and none of the drafts were working. And that's probably because, all of these thoughts and all of these ideas were jumbled up in my head. So it takes time, I think, to figure out what you want to say and how you want to say it. But that figuring out can only happen when you write. I mean, you keep on writing, you write drafts and drafts and drafts. Eventually something works, something tells you that this is working, and I can continue with this. And that's, it takes a lot of time, but it happens. Eventually, when you keep at it, it will happen.
That's a great question. And get a good editor. Get someone to read to help you edit. That's really important. In the back.
We'll take the next one.
Yeah, congratulations to the Quartet, the first time authors. It's very nice to listen to your stories and the excerpts, very exciting. I had a question about your process more than anything else. As an author myself, one of the struggles that I have faced in this maze of literature, it's such a maze that one is amazed at times. And one of the biggest challenges for the first-time authors is trying to find a good editor and a publisher. Just like what you had said right now, find an editor. Well, it's more than just a word, it's very difficult finding an editor and a publisher.
You're in the right place. I just want to say, they walk among us in this
I haven't
festival.
found anyone
yet. Can I
yet.
point out, Shayantan is back there? I'm just saying, can you raise your hand? No, I'm kidding. But jokes apart, can we get the next question in, and then Rupleena will take this one?
So how did you, how was your journey in finding that?
So Rupleena will
I'll
take this
answer you also as a teacher.
Short answers. Yeah, question? Okay. Yeah.
So, anyone can answer. So how do you, as first-time authors, keep a balance between the story that you want to tell and also elements of style? I mean, whether you want to tell something simply or have a subtext or use, sort of literary tools. how do you keep that balance? Because I believe, again, as an aspiring author, that's what I'm sort of struggling with. Either going either way too much may not work. So
Very, very good questions. Okay, Rupleena, take the first one, and then
Yeah.
who wants to take the next one? Okay.
So actually, I'll start with yours because you said that. So one of the things as a teacher, I can tell you that there is no, if you're writing poetry, because you said that you write poetry, right? I would say, image is very important. So if you look at the image, I mean, like a very specific answer, this is a very specific answer, but focus on a particular image, and then the image will sort of take you outside and give you a larger context of the world. So if sometimes when you struggle, it's nice to just go back to the image, or images which sort of help you understand. It could be like a firefly, I don't know what it means in this world of concrete, for example. So that is an image to go forward. And of course, keep writing is one of the things which everybody says.
Please find her at the book signing after. All of the writers will be. We're short on time, so this question, and we have one last.
Yeah. I think for form and, what you are asking is form and content. Take it. Sorry.
I've confused them now.
Sorry. So form and content, you're saying how to sort of juggle in form and content. I think if you spend enough time with the text finds its way. Text will lead you to its final outcome. Narrative is also something which is out there. So if you spend enough time with just playing with the narrative and focusing on the story, the form and the content sort of comes together in the end.
Okay, and we had that question on finding an editor. Anisha, can you answer these two? And this last question will go to Nayantara.
Sure. So the first thing is on style and plot. Yeah, so I struggle with that a lot. I think, one of the pleasures of writing literary fiction is you can focus on the style, you can focus on the language, which genre fiction doesn't allow. And, my book is it's very plot-centric in the sense that it's a thriller, right? So I really needed to focus on the plot as well as the style. I think at the end of the day, for me, it just boiled down to instinct. I don't have a very specific answer to this, but at that moment, what felt right was just instinct, but always keep the reader in mind. No matter how enjoyable and the aesthetic side of things is, it's like, for me, I was always conscious of the reader in mind. So yeah, that's...
How do you find an editor, guys? No, not Rupleena. Anyone else?
So you find a good editor by finding a good agent. And yeah, that's how I found
She's found her voice, so I'm giving everyone else a chance. Last question, Nayantara has to take it because we're out of time.
Hello everyone. My question was actually for Nayantara. First things first, I have to say my mother and I are a huge fan of Anuja ma'am. And now you as well. This mother duo loves that mother daughter duo as well.
Thank you so much.
Secondly, my question was, your book is as much of a romance as it is a coming-of-age story. So, they are both two of the most widely explored genres in the literature. So, as a debut author, how challenging was it for you to, bring a sense of originality and freshness to the genre that has already been written so extensively?
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, that's always a challenge. Thank you so much, firstly. Secondly, I think that it was just a story that was very personal to me and to my own experience. And so I just really, really wanted to write it. And I honestly didn't think too much about where it will be placed in, the larger world of literature. It was kind of like, okay, I really have this story to tell. And I'm going to tell it the way that I want to. Because for me, writing is about a coping mechanism with stressful life. And, my day job is very hectic. And so then, I come out of it and I'm at home and I'm like, okay, this is my world. This is where I have control now. And so I really enjoy that creative freedom. So I honestly did not think much about how to be fresh or, how to be different. I just felt like my experiences are varied and specific to me and the story should reflect that. And that's all.
Amazing. And we are over time now. Thank you all. Please thank our amazing panelists. Get their books. You can get them signed. Rupleena, Atharva, Nayantara, and Anisha, congratulations again. Thank you for
Thank
this.
you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
All the